put your hands above your head. And put your hands above your head.
Welcome back to Recappy. Today we are going to recap a 2016 movie titled Girl in the Box. This movie is based on a true real-life story. Colleen, a 22-year-old hitchhiker, is kidnapped by a young couple in May 1977 and forced to work as their slave and babysitter for the next 7 years. But before we begin, please consider subscribing to this channel. Now, without wasting any further time, let's begin, shall we? Our film starts with the true story of Cameron and Janice, a married couple who practice S&M. They're in the middle of nowhere in their automobile, so Cameron pulls over and asks Janice to help him open the trunk. She refuses, distressed, but he persuades her, and they remove a woman's body from the trunk and drag it into the woods. He buries the body as Janice keeps an eye on things. As the sun rises, they finish burying the body and return to the car. Janice, distraught, says she didn't expect someone to die, but he claims he had to since she was screaming and they were going to be caught, and they drive away. On the morning of May 19, 1997, a girl called Colleen stands on the side of the road looking for a ride. Later that day, Cameron and Janice are driving when they discover her. They cheerfully offer her a ride, which she accepts, and they introduce themselves. Colleen then confesses to hitchhiking from Oregon to California to attend a friend's birthday party. They arrive at a gas station an hour later, where they fill up their tank with gasoline while Colleen freshens up in the bathroom and Cameron retrieves a box from the trunk and places it in the back seat. They're back on the road, and Cameron informs Colleen that they'll be stopping to see some ice caves. Despite her reservations at first, she accepts, and they drive to the woods. When he unexpectedly approaches Colleen with a knife in her throat, he threatens to kill her if she does not cooperate. She agrees, terrified, and he blindfolds her, gags her, and handcuffs her before placing her head inside the box in the back seat. Later that night, they return to their house, where Cameron takes Colleen into the basement, summons Janice to come down, and tears off Colleen's clothes before tormenting her, finally placing her head back in the box. Cameron leaves the house the next morning to buy a potty chair and food for Colleen. He returns at night, where he feeds her in the basement before whipping her. Janice is upstairs, listening to what is going on, and she begins to feel bad. Janice asks Cameron what he will do with Colleen since she spoke to her and is concerned that she will report them to the police if they let her go, and Cameron responds that they will keep her in the basement. The next morning, Cameron constructs a wooden coffin in which he places Colleen. Terrified, she begins to recall the day she left home. Her father offered to pay the bus fare, but she declined since she wanted to hitchhike, and when she was in the gas station bathroom, she had second thoughts about the couple and was going to flee. But she changed her mind. Jack, Colleen's father, receives a phone call an hour later informing him that his daughter is gone, and he and his wife proceed to the police station to file a report. Janice visits to Cameron's office 6 months later to inform him that she is pregnant and that Colleen should be released. He is unconvinced and tries to persuade her otherwise. Cameron and Janice return home a month later after Janice's arthritis surgery. He peruses the magazines and discovers an underground captivity contract in one of them. He instructs Janice to put up a fictitious captivity contract and goes to the basement. He tells Colleen that he works for a business that oversees the captive trade and that he made up a story about Janice, who used to be a slave and was mistreated before he acquired her. She signs the bogus contract, terrified, and he informs her that she is now their legal captive, threatening that if she tries to go, the firm will pursue her family. The next morning, Cameron is speaking with Colleen, informing her of her new responsibilities as his new slave, as well as her new name, Kay, and the collar he has placed around her neck. She gradually begins to complete all of the household chores. A year later, Cameron and Janice are at home late at night when she gives birth to a baby girl named Amber, and he lets Colleen out of the coffin for a brief moment to view his new daughter. The next morning, Cameron is speaking with Colleen, and he tells her a made-up narrative about a hostage who managed to flee from her captor and sought assistance from the police. However, it came out that the police were part of the organization, and they apprehended her and began to cut off her limbs and tongue. She begins to embrace her new role as a slave, despite her fear. When Cameron takes Colleen to the woods to chop wood a few days later, Janice begins to be envious of her. Cameron injures himself while chopping wood, and Colleen considers fleeing. She chooses to assist him instead of fleeing because she is afraid. He talks with Janice later that night, and she complains that he wants Colleen more than she does. He offers that they share her, and she agrees. When he begins to have his way with her, however, Janice becomes enraged and demands that he return her to the box and never touch her again. Colleen has changed dramatically in the 4 years since her kidnapping, and one night she sees Amber all grown up. She asks Janice how long she's been here, perplexed. Cameron and Janice are leaving Colleen alone in the box the next morning for a lake vacation. Colleen then begins to wonder why she's going through this, when she begins to get visions of a priest telling her that the agony and suffering she's been through is God's test for her. Then she has a terrifying dream about drowning and kicks open the box's door. Cameron and his family return home a few days later, and he goes to his bedroom to discover the box door open. He hunts for Colleen, fearful that she has escaped, and eventually finds her in the shower. He talks with Janice later that night after she informs him she was reading about the captives' obligations in the book about slaves and masters. He tells her that they need to let Colleen out of the box, and she asks if he will sleep with her. He assures that he will, citing a line in the book that enables masters to sleep with their slaves as justification. Janice, feeling guilty, agrees to be friendlier with Colleen. Cameron returns to work the next day, while Janice takes Colleen out of the box and reads the Bible with her. They begin to bond, and Colleen also becomes acquainted with Amber. Colleen had been Cameron's maid for 6 years, performing all of the household tasks. One day, they go to church together, and Janice begins to feel bad about what she'd done. They're playing with Amber after church when Cameron arrives home from work. Angry at what he sees, he drags Janice into the bedroom and whips her. An hour later, Colleen visits Janice in the bedroom to console her. The next morning, Cameron informs Colleen that she is welcome to see her family since he persuaded the corporation to allow her to do so. She is overjoyed and expresses her gratitude to him for the opportunity. They arrive at her family's home an hour later, when he cautions her not to say anything suspicious or the corporation will kill her family, and she is finally reunited with her family. Her family is overjoyed to see her again, and Cameron introduces himself as Mike and leaves her with her family, who are enjoying supper together an hour later. When Bonnie notices that Colleen isn't feeling well, she inquires about her whereabouts, but she remains silent. Cameron arrives at Colleen's house to pick her up a few days later, and her family questions him about how they met. And he fabricates a narrative about how they met a few months ago and are intending to marry, and then they return to Cameron's house. Cameron is talking with Colleen later that night, and he tells her that he wants to marry her. Janice overhears them outdoors. Angry, she decides to see her parents and packs her belongings to leave the house the next morning. Cameron, enraged, whips Colleen and then locks her in the shed outside the home. He drives away from the house in his automobile, and Janice feels bad about leaving her alone, so she returns to his house and frees Colleen. Janice encourages Colleen to go home, but she refuses because she doesn't want to betray Cameron. Instead, Janice tells her about how he murdered a girl a few years ago and buried her in the woods. Also, there is no such thing as captive company, so Colleen takes a bus back to Oregon so she may go home. After 7 years in captivity, Cameron is apprehended by the authorities and sentenced to 104 years in prison, but Janice is granted immunity from prosecution because she testified against her husband, and the film comes to a close. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, until next time.